So thank you everybody for coming out today, and thank you Circle and Nevada County Cannabis Alliance and all the sponsors today. This is awesome that everybody's here to learn and to know what your responsibilities are. I'm here on behalf of Restore California. My day job is an attorney with Harvest Law Group down in Sacramento. Our main focus is on compliance and licensing for the cannabis industry. And then in my off time, I help with Restore California. Melissa Sanchez is the chair. She's also my supervising attorney at Harvest Law. She was unable to make it today, unfortunately. But Restore California has three main goals, and those are to educate cultivators on responsible growing practices and direct them to the appropriate resources to really learn what your responsibilities are as far as usage of pesticides, maintaining waterways, usage of water, to fund remediation and to restore land that's destroyed by illegal cultivation, and to support the work of law enforcement agencies and to work with them to aid in their destruction and enforcement of illegal cultivation sites, primarily drug trafficking organizations. So we've prepared a short video that I'd like to play, and will be available for questions after.
We do 100 to 200 of these a year, closer to 200. Trespass marijuana grow sites, an arrest element, sometimes an eradication element on poison plants. The particular site we're going to today was a cartel trespass marijuana cultivation site here in the Central Coast. But we are barely putting a dent in the problem. Basically, a conservative estimate, we have between 2,000 and 3,000 clandestine, organized crime, trespass, marijuana grow sites in the state of California every year.
Suspects on the run.
Go by me!
Do not move! It's big. Bullets and unknown things in those containers.
Rat poison.
And killing rabbits and the other animals that ingest it.
Because we didn't have the time or the resources or the support, that day we couldn't finish reclamating and cleaning up that site.
This particular complex sadly had been in play for probably 5 or more years, which means for 5 years they've been doing egregious environmental damage.
They can get the bad guys per se, but they cannot always clean up the site. And so the site is just left there. We recently went to the cleanup site in the Santa Cruz Mountains, and it was just absolutely horrendous in terms of mountains of trash. You had these dams, makeshift dams that they created.
We're looking at 1.3 billion gallons of water, conservative estimate, were stolen by cartel trespass growers all over California. This water is pumped in from pristine waterways, and poison water is then pumped down to the plants themselves. So we have poison water we have to deal with carefully, water lines that are contaminated that we have to be careful handling when we reclimate and restore, and then dismantling these so they can't hold water again if used illegally. We will have helicopter nets coming and a ship to help haul this out within about a half hour, and then we'll have sanitized this site as much as we can for the day.
It really is critical that everybody get involved and everybody understand that we need to put our money where our mouth is. If we really want to get rid of this type of devastation, protect the environment, get rid of these illegal grows, protect our community, well, then we need to put more funding toward it.
There's a difference between the cannabis grower who wants to go and become a regulated cannabis grower and go through licensing, and a criminal drug trafficking organization. The mission of Restore California is to fund the cleanup and remediation of cultivation sites where there was damage caused by drug trafficking organizations, to educate the cannabis community about environmental regulations, and finally to fund the efforts of law enforcement agencies who do the work of the restoration.
So we prepared this video late last year after we had done that cleanup in the Santa Cruz Mountains. Currently, we're working with Department of Fish and Wildlife to find other sites that are actually acceptable for our team and volunteers to go in and remediate. In most cases, they're so full of toxins and poisons that average people can't go there. You have to wear full hazmat suits and be certified to deal with the poisons that are on site. So, pretty much what I've got. I'll hand it over to you guys.
Hello. All right. I'm Griffin Perea with the Central Valley Water Board. I'm a senior engineering geologist in the Redding office and the program manager for the Central Valley's cannabis program. So I'll kind of breeze through some of the background so we can get more to questions and answers. But basically, the water board kind of got brought into the loop started in 2013 with complaints from Butte County. Unfortunately, from a lot of the stuff that was just or similar things from what was seen in the video. A lot of the cartel-related grows, big environmental damages. So 2013, letters were produced, went to the governor's office, came back down to the water board. You guys got to get a program together to help deal with the program. So 2014, basically all the staff were hired up. Trey being one of the first staff that was hired for the program. Hit the ground running pretty much, started heavy with enforcement activities, and then eventually we're transitioning into permitting and enforcement now. But just kind of the Central Valley region, northeast corner of California, all the way down towards Bakersfield, in between the Coast Range and the Sierra Nevada Range. So it's the biggest region in the state for the water board, 35 counties, all with different ordinances related to cultivation. And then this just shows some of the overlap with our region and the Department of Fish and Wildlife regions. So we work throughout the state with Fish and Wildlife, with the MET team as well as the WET team, which is their watershed enforcement team. And we, go out and document some of the sites similar to what you saw in the video. So, like I said, the first issues were identified, mostly environmental damages. That's kind of what spurred us getting involved, is trying to figure out how to deal with some of these environmental damages. So the water diversions, the grading, the pesticides and fertilizers that were improperly stored, untreated domestic waste, timber conversion, and then public safety. Those were the very first things that brought us into this. Next. So we have to have, this makes our attorneys happy. So our program we don't care that it's a cannabis plant. We're strictly looking at the environmental damages or the potential environmental damages associated with it. So we kind of take that part out of it and treat the grading and the environmental impacts similar to stormwater program or any of the other environmental programs in our agency. So the water board's authority has to deal with basically anything water quality related. That's what our program focuses on, in addition to the water rights aspect. You can fly through these. Okay, this is actually, so when Hezekiah was talking about Senate Bill 837, that's what really brought the state board and the Division of Water Rights into the mix, specifically with cannabis cultivation. So it tasks them with creating what they're calling their principles and guidelines. And those are a set of regulations specific for cannabis cultivation sites. Goes through the types of water diversions, identifying where your source is from, filing reports every year of what your uses are. And it's all part of the requirements of that Senate bill. So it is in law, those requirements. In addition, the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, through their 1600 process, has authority over permitting anything that has to do with the modification of a bed bank or channel of a water course, in addition to the protection of sensitive species. So they have And they've had that authority since they were founded. It's nothing new from the regulations. It's just applying it to the new regulations. Let's talk about that. Okay, keep going. All right. So the water boards, the meat of our programs, we have both enforcement and we have permitting. So one of the core principles of our permit process is that the county that you're cultivating in has to allow it. You have to be in compliance with whatever local county or city ordinances are in place prior to being able to apply for our general order permit. So the North Coast, which is Region 1, and the Central Valley, which is Region 5, both passed their general orders in 2015. And again, those general orders are aimed at the environmental impact associated with site development and just the cultivation operations. So it's in the tier structure, similar to the new regulations that are coming out. Higher tiers being a higher risk site, increased annual fees, increased requirements for compliance. Okay, talk about that. Keep going. All right. So the tier structure. Those of you may be familiar with the general order. Maybe I've talked to some of you on the phone, or Trey's talked to you. But the tier 1 sites are basically the small sites. They're shallow slopes, far away from a water course, less than 1/4 of an acre in size. So those are pretty easy sites to go through the permitting process. They require that you fill out the notice of intent form, which is a self-certified form. It's available on our website. Has basic information, the property location, the APN number, who the cultivator is, who the landowner is, and then other requirements. Are you in compliance with your county ordinance? Did you have to get a grading permit or a timber conversion? So it's just a bunch of check boxes that you fill out, submit to the office, and then we go through the review process. So tier 1's pretty quick and easy. Tier 2, getting a little bit more threat, larger size. You're still on fairly shallow slopes, and you're less than 1 acre in size. Tier 3, you're getting into the highest threat, steep slopes, a little bit closer distance to aquatic life-bearing water course, and you're greater than 1 acre. So any one of those 3 things will kick you in the tier 3. So these are just some examples of tier 1 operation. You can see the scale of the house. So the grow size actually isn't that much bigger than the size of that house. It's on flat slopes. It's far away from a water course. There's really not a lot of threats for water quality degradation from sites like these, which is why there's less requirements to go through the permitting process, and it has a cheaper annual fee. It's $1,000 annual fee for the tier 1 site. So tier 2, again, it's on shallow ground, less than 30% sloped, but it is getting increase in size. So with the increase in size, there's an increased threat of sediment discharge or impacts to sensitive species or sensitive habitats. So the tier 2 sites are going to require, in addition to filling out and applying, if it's a new site, it requires a biological site assessment and a cultural resources assessment. And that's just to identify any potential sensitive habitat, sensitive species, historical significance, or coming up with a work plan in case you uncover something culturally sensitive. So the tree removal aspect is actually, that's where the other permits that may be required. So tree removal, an example would be CAL FIRE. If it's a commercial tree species, they have a process that you have to get a permit from them to remove that tree species and convert the land to a different use. Specific to our general order, if it's in CAL FIRE jurisdictional timberland, they take the lead on that aspect of it. If it's outside of that area, our general order states that within 150 feet of, I believe, an aquatic life-bearing stream, there's no tree removal allowed. So there is some protections for that, but most of the time that's going to be CAL FIRE's jurisdiction, especially up in this elevation band where you're getting into their zone timberland. Okay, so tier 3, these are the biggest sites. They're on potentially steep slopes, and they're within 200 feet to an aquatic life-bearing water course. So you can see just the site preparation alone is a lot more intensive. You know, if you're on these steep slopes, more than likely you're going to be terracing or leveling. You're going to need access roads. You're going to need a pretty substantial water infrastructure. So these are the sites that they have a lot of disturbance associated with them, and they have the potential for ongoing discharges or impacts to water quality. So in addition to the biological and cultural studies for Tier 2, the Tier 3 sites have to produce a site management plan, which is it's similar to a stormwater pollution prevention plan that construction sites have to deal with. So it details what are the sensitive areas of your site, how are you going to handle those sensitive areas, what sorts of best management practices are you going to employ to prevent erosion, how are you going to store your chemicals, you know, basically a comprehensive view of how the site is set up and how it's going to be operated. And Trey's going to get into more detail on some specific BMPs. So the CEQA compliance portion of our general order, like I said, you have to have all other applicable permits. So if you need to make a crossing to be able to get to the site, you have to go through Fish and Wildlife to get a 1602 permit for the alteration of bed bank or channel of a stream. You have to be in compliance with your local ordinances. So if they require some sort of a permit from the local county, or if there's a grading ordinance in your county, you need to have proof that you have attained all of those as well. In addition, we have those studies that are required specific for our general order, the cultural resources and the biological site assessment. Okay. So, like I said, the notice of intent, it's a pretty simple form to fill out. It's a lot of check boxes, yes or no answers. Then you sign your name and you send it in. So the thing you want to do though is make sure you're aware of what you're checking off, because they are requirements. So it says, I have attained a grading ordinance if it's required. If you check yes on that and we do a site inspection, or if we can't find proof that a grading ordinance was obtained, then technically, you know, that was an incorrect answer on that notice of intent, and there's some potential issues with that. So just making sure that when you're going through, you really do understand all the things that you're checking, and you understand the requirements of the general order. That way, when we do site inspections or we follow up on the permitting aspect, everything's good to go. Okay. Oh, and then the annual fees. So there's a question about that earlier. So the annual fees for the Tier 1 sites, they're $1,000 a year. Tier 2 is $2,500, and Tier 3 is $10,000 per year. And again, that reflects the amount of staff time it takes to oversee those permits. So the Tier 3 sites, higher annual fee. It takes up more oversight on our part. We're going to be doing more inspections, and it takes more to review that application and process it. And then, you know, the Tier 1 sites are pretty quick. They're low threat. It doesn't take much staff oversight on those because they are low threat. That's why the annual fees are less. So, in addition to the annual fees for the Tier 2 and Tier 3, there's monitoring components. So you have to take a look at your site, make sure that it's not eroding, make sure there's no other issues. You have to prepare your site for the winter. So after your operations have quit, if you're not going to be accessing that site during the winter, you want to make sure that when you walk away, there's not going to be any potential issues throughout the rainy season. That way, when you get back on site the next spring, when you're getting ready to go, won't have a lot of issues to fix, and there won't be any violations. Yeah. For the monitoring. So that's pretty much the date that all the water board programs, including the construction programs, use as the beginning of the wet weather period. So it's, I know with this industry, it is a struggle for that. But really what it does is it kind of just sets that benchmark of, okay, no, the rainy season's coming around. I need to at least start preparing for it and at least getting the site ready. Yeah, absolutely. So if you're still harvesting and you're still operational at your site, obviously you're going to have to continue those operations, but maybe there's some other things that you could start doing in preparation for the winter. And again, it's one of those check marks that, okay, November 1st is here, the rainy season is going to be starting. I should at least start thinking about what's going to happen for this winter. If you're still operational, you're still using the site, then obviously you still have to continue your operations. But we just want to make sure that when you're done and you're out of there for the winter, that there's not going to be any issues. So then the post-winter monitoring conducted in the spring, it's that kind of follow-up. So I prepared my site for the winter. What worked? Did the BMPs that I put out there, did they actually work? Were there other issues or are there things I could have changed for next year? So that's what that spring monitoring is really for. It's a double check. It's kind of letting us know, okay, these things worked at our site, these things didn't. We're going to modify it for next year, and hopefully it'll get better after that. Okay, keep going. So this is an example of, a schematic of what would be included in a site management plan for those tier 3 sites. So it's, telling us exactly what the site looks like, where the cultivation is occurring, where any of the chemical storage is occurring, where the watering system is at, access roads, potential areas of concern where specific BMPs are going to be implemented. The list kind of goes on, but it's just a real detailed inventory of how your site's operated and how you're going to make sure your site stays in compliance with the general order. So, the permitting side is the side that we like, actually. It's easier. It's pretty straightforward. We have the general order that we rely on. For those sites that are way out of compliance with the general order or illegal sites, we have our enforcement authority. So the water boards have a pretty strong ability to make people clean up their sites. We don't like to go through this process. It's very time consuming for both the person going through it and for the water boards. It takes up a lot of staff time that's not as necessary. So the one thing we do say is if you're going to be growing, if you're out of compliance with county ordinance or whatever, just being compliant with the water board's general order, because these fines rack up very heftily. If it gets to that point, if you're potentially $10,000 per day, and if you're in violation for a year, they really start racking up. So the one thing we do say is if you are going to cultivate no matter where or what, get familiar with the general order and the best management practices manual and being compliant with that at least so you're not causing environmental damages. Again, that's what the water boards are really after, is those impacts to water quality, those potential environmental damages. That's what we're trying to get at. I'm not supposed to say anything here, I guess. Okay. So, site development. That's really kind of one of the biggest impacts, especially in steep ground. If you're going to be doing terracing, don't do this kind of terracing. There's actually 2 creeks that used to run through there. So, yeah, don't do that stuff. These next few pictures are things you really want to stay away from. Illegal timber conversion. We see this a lot. And these are some of our enforcement sites. This is the stuff that we want to get away from. Road design is another big one. Depending on where your site is located, if you do have to build a road to get out to your cultivation pad or your site, we strongly recommend that you have a professional get involved or some sort of, road design. It seems easy, but it really isn't. And those are some of our biggest contributors of sediment. Roads and watercourse crossings have by far the most issues related to these sites. So the roads are very important. These are some of the in-stream impacts that we've observed. Failed storage pond, sedimentation from, I believe that was sedimentation from that big graded picture. That's probably, at one point there was probably a few feet of sediment in the creek that's continually being washed out, continually moving downstream. So these one-time impacts can have really lasting effects, especially if they're happening at the head of the watercourse, because it's going to continue to move downstream. The storage of fertilizers, or if you're using any sort of pesticides or fertilizers, making sure that they are stored in a manner where wildlife can't get to them, that there's no chance of them to discharge. Even if it's discharged to the ground surface, there's still a potential for that to eventually have an impact to a watercourse. So it's making sure your site is really buttoned up so you're not going to be having these issues. And then the water diversion is a big one. Like we said, that's outlined pretty heavily in Senate Bill 837. In addition, the state water board is going to be releasing, they're hoping to release it sometime in the next month, draft versions of some of these documents to be able to start the comment period. But irregardless, if you do have a riparian water right on your property and you're exercising that, there is still technically a requirement to file that use. So make sure, water rights are very complicated in California, and nobody really knows 100% of what the requirements are. But at the bare minimum, you could go to the State Water Board's Division of Water Rights webpage, and they have a cannabis cultivation program webpage now that has some of these requirements and kind of outlines it. Makes it a little bit more digestible. Okay, one of the other things that our program is trying to develop and still in the process is technology to help staff resources. So one of the things we're developing is called the Cannabis Identification and Prioritization System, and it's a GIS-based, it's a web-based platform that allows us to track sites, to identify new sites, both for permitting and enforcement. So it has the ability to, it has some remote sensing abilities that we haven't fully developed yet, but it also has the ability for us to pinpoint exactly where these high-impact watersheds are. Because when we're looking at that, we're looking at these cumulative impacts that nobody really has a definitive answer on what these cumulative impacts are. So it's another tool that we're trying to develop to answer some of those questions. All right, so I'm getting ready to wrap it up. Some of the lessons learned from both the permitting and enforcement aspect. Again, like I said, if you're in a county that doesn't allow it or is very restrictive of the size requirements, if you're going to be outside of those requirements, at a minimum, be in compliance with the Water Board's BMPs. That's the environmental damages associated with these can be pretty severe. So we want to make sure that everyone's doing as much as they can to prevent those from occurring. For our permitting side of things, one thing we've noticed is counties, we've had a couple of counties in the Central Valley region that have put our language into their county ordinance. You must obtain a Water Board permit in addition to our local permit. It's been good and bad. It's been good that we've had a lot of applicants and we have a lot of people therefore trying to comply with our general order. The bad is when we get almost 600 applications in 3 to 4 months, as Trey remembers. I'm pretty sure there were safety violations from the stack of paperwork in our office. We could have gotten crushed at any time. But it really is a good thing, though, for the counties to be aware of what our requirements are and to at least have those referenced or somehow just have the knowledge of our program so that they can steer people in the right direction. Where we've been able to capitalize on that is trying to get in early on the process. So giving presentations like these is perfect for us because we can at least get the word out there, and if we're lucky, maybe eventually there will be a board of soup in the audience and they can start to learn about the program. We're always happy to present at board of soups meetings if we get invited, or task force meetings, because between Trey, myself, Bob Ditto, who's in the program, and Mike Parker, the three of us now represent the Central Valley Water Board's cannabis program, and then Trey was formerly in the program and pretty much helped build the whole thing. So between the four of us, we have the most knowledge for the Central Valley region. So we're pretty limited in how we can spread that knowledge. So the biggest impacts are trying to get in with the counties or the task forces that they're putting together and really trying to get the education on our program out there. Okay, so just a few pictures of before and afters on some of our enforcement sites that we've dealt with, some of the restoration projects. We have seen success with our enforcement activities, but again, they're a very long process and they're very drawn out. So the best thing is to start the site out in a good way. Start, when you're creating the site or if you have created your site, making sure that those things are implemented in the beginning so you don't have to go back and try and fix things. And that's it. And I gave them a copy of the presentation that they'll upload to the website, so you'll have some of these contact information. And then for the Central Valley Water Board, the easiest thing to do is just do a Google search for Central Valley Water Board Cannabis. That'll take you right to our homepage where it has all the information for our general order, list of contacts, and it has a copy of the BMP manual, information related to our program. I think that's all I have for now, unless there's specific questions now, or I know Trey's going to fill in a lot on the types of BMPs that we like to see.
So it's already been established. I used to work with the Water Board. My name's Trey, Sherrell. I'm now an environmental and compliance consultant. I'm going to talk to you about best management practices in cannabis cultivation. I'm also going to talk about some things that you can do now in Nevada County or any county within the Yuba River watershed, absent a cultivation ordinance. As we're waiting for a cultivation ordinance from your board of supervisors, I guess is who will adopt it. Yeah, best management. Oh, will you guys do me a favor and interrupt me and disrupt the flow of this presentation? That really helps me out a lot. I'm serious. I'm serious. All right. Next slide. Okay, so thank you. Best management practices. Those are practices to implement in your cultivation, in and around your cultivation operation, so as to mitigate or eliminate all sources of pollution from your operation. Particularly, I'm going to speak to water-related sources of pollution. And as Griffin touched on, kind of the biggest issues we've seen from cannabis cultivation have been the roads, not necessarily. Now, that one big graded area, yeah, that cultivation site itself was a big problem. And actually, yeah, but the roads were still one of the greater problems at that site. And as I've been going out and visiting cannabis farms, you guys had to put them out somewhere where they wouldn't be easily seen. And in doing so, you often had to develop a road that could be, miles long, and cross multiple streams in the process. And that is where we see the greatest sources of pollution associated with cannabis cultivation. And then the other big issue is water supply. These cannabis is a plant; it needs water and sunlight and soil. Hezekiah kind of touched on it this morning. There are going to be, in the draft regs from CDFA, there are 5 sources of water supply for your cultivation operation, kind of outlined there, and there's different reporting requirements. You're going to have to provide information on your water source to the Water Board and the Cal Cannabis Cultivation Program. Those 5 sources are retail water suppliers, so that's like your municipality if you get water from an irrigation district or something of that sort. So somebody provides you with water. A groundwater well, rainwater catchment system, a diversion from a surface water body that requires a permit from and reporting with the State Water Resources Control Board. And then there's also surface water diversions that do not require reporting, but those are very limited.
I have a question that if you're using well wires, that the water board is going to require a well log. And I was wondering what you're looking for in that well log.
So when your well is drilled, if it was a permitted well and you had a licensed, reputable well driller, they filed a report, your well log, and that's really important. Hezekiah said earlier, the easiest one is going to be the rainwater catchment. It has the lowest threshold of reporting. But the next step up is probably, actually, retail water supplier. You just provide, hey, I'm on this irrigation district. Then it's rainwater catchment, and then it's going to be your well. And I would assume most of you guys use well water to irrigate your plants. And absolutely, if you're going to have to find your well log. So when it was drilled, they logged what levels they went through as they drilled. There's a standard form, and it used to be that those forms were turned over to your county public health or environmental health department. Now the Department of Water Resources is cataloging all of those reports at the moment. They were supposed to be done cataloging that early this year. They've already exceeded that deadline, so I don't know how soon. I mean, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of wells in the state of California, so it's going to take them a long time. So what you're going to have to do is, I'm actually having to do this for some clients in Trinity County right now, where we're we got to figure out where the well log is. Somebody has it, you know. Environmental health doesn't want to take the time to go look through their records to find the well log, and Department of Water Resources hasn't gotten to that record in their kind of catalog. So you're going to have to bug someone and find them. That's the basic thing. You're going to have to talk to your county public environmental health office. Yes, if it's of a certain age, it may not exist. I don't know how they're going to handle that. I know in Trinity what we're doing is we're having a pump test done. We're trying to find every bit of information that we can about that well. And then once we've exhausted that, in addition, we are having a pump test done, which is going to give us the gallons per minute that that well can produce consistently. Also information, so when you're looking for these records, you want to have the geographic location, the GPS point is what I'm using, of your well. And if you have your APN number, the GPS point for your well, and then the physical address, if applicable, you should be able to find whatever information there is for your well out there. But if it was drilled before the 70s, there may not be anything.
So it sounds like the well log is more of a well report, not necessarily
Yes, yes, yeah. But there are going to be some reporting requirements. You'll do yourself. You guys. So let me back up a step. I've been working with cannabis cultivation regulation in the state of California for nearly 3 years now. I can tell you that from what I've seen, cannabis is going to be the most environmentally friendly but heavily regulated industry in the state of California. Documentation. That's going to be the rule going forward. A lot of what was in the draft reg package was about documentation, and what a lot of that has to deal with the track and trace system, so you can prove that you're in compliance with the track and trace. But then there's other documentation such as these well logs that you're going to have to provide. If there's one thing in there that we're going to have to make comment about, but it's you're going to have to provide evidence that either you do have or you do not need a 1600 permit from the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. It's kind of proving a negative if your operation doesn't cross, which can be difficult and burdensome for CDFW if they have to write all these letters saying no, they don't need a 1600. But those are issues that will get fleshed out in the comment process, hopefully. Yeah.
Are there disqualifications that could turn up in the well log, like gallons per minute or other things like that?
Not as outlined at this time. There's nothing like that could outline it. If the production capacity was enormous, I can't even think, like 100 to 1,000 gallons a minute. I mean, that would be a huge production. They may determine that they may want to go back in and look and see if you haven't tapped into what they define them as underground stream flowing in a known and definite channel. I'm not even sure what that is, but
They're looking at the time and the surface.
yeah. Oh, okay. So it's the Hyperic Exchange.
Yeah, so
Okay.
the well is influenced in nearby streets with their hydrology. That's when it would potentially be an issue because it technically could be considered surface.
Yeah, you're not going to see it much over here in the Sierras, just due to geology. But on the north coast and from Lake County and Trinity County, I've seen. They will plunge a well 10 feet beside a creek because that's where the water is, and if there's a hydrologic connection between that surface water body and your well, basically if your well is taking water out of the creek, then you're going to have to report it as if it was a surface water diversion.
One more on
Yeah,
the
yeah.
same topic. So
I appreciate it.
Would a low flow rate require more storage on the surface, or is there any correlation to that?
Well, the correlation would be how large your operation is and how much water you're going to need. So low flow rate doesn't necessarily mean, because you could have a solar pump on a low flow well, and you're going to want to have a lot of storage because you're not going to be able to ramp up production of that well immediately. But you could be pumping year round, every sunny day. It pumps and stores in your 4 2,500 gallon tanks. Water storage Griffin touched on the principles and guidelines. The State Water Resource Control Board is kind of bending over backwards to assist cannabis cultivators in water storage. There's typically, for example, it's not legal right now to store water if you have a riparian water right. You have to pump and use, basically. But that's not really feasible, and there's going to be forbearance periods in those principles and guidelines where you're not able to pump water or divert water from a surface water body. And when in doing so they're encouraging storage, because if you store during the winter, the thing about cannabis plants is they use the most at the same time that California's surface streams are at the driest. And so that's the problem. So they're trying to resolve that nexus there, that issue. Okay, so this is a general explanation. You're gonna have to research what you have available, because some people may have a stream flowing through their property and not have riparian water rights because the watered body below has been fully adjudicated, meaning that all of that water. I'm thinking of like the historical Owens Valley situation where Southern California cut off the top of Owens Valley, and they said all of this water is ours, and so you couldn't put a straw above where they were taking the water. The same thing happens in other areas of California where all the water has been adjudicated. Someone has a legal right to that water downstream, and you're not allowed to take out of it. But for the most part, in California, a riparian water right, and if you have a stream flowing through your property, you likely have a riparian water right, and you can divert a percentage of that flow. That's not the percentage has to be so low that it's not going to affect any aquatic wildlife below. But like I said, you have to use it. So like you pump water out of a creek, you use it on a parcel that is contiguous with that water body. So if the water body runs through that parcel, that property, or if it's on one boundary, and so you can use it on that property. You can't transfer it over the hill or to another property. So do you know if there's a channel? It sounded like there's not a channel above either of these. You said it's just.
No, this is not that I know of. As far as I know, it's water running down. We made a garden out of water running down.
Yeah, so that's.
So is there going to be any funding help for all these farmers in storage tanks?
No, not.
That would be a nice incentive.
That would be. They've been over.
All the money they're going to be making with all the licenses, etc.
Yeah.
We need something like that.
I agree with. Yeah. So she brought up a really good point. Was that so? If there's an identifiable channel leading into what we're calling stock ponds, or an identifiable channel going out of. These are now jurisdictional waterways, but a lot of these stock ponds just fill up during the winter when it's raining. There's no channel going into it. That would be those surface water diversions that don't require reporting because it's not really considered a jurisdictional waterway. Yes, but the thing about these stock ponds are, yours doesn't sound like it'll be an issue. Okay, yeah, so yours doesn't seem to be an issue, but some of these have been on the landscape so long and they stay wet all year round, and now they're habitat. So now there's requirements, CDFW, the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, has requirements for if you can, for pumping from that water body, or even if you can, because I mean, if it's this habitat for a salamander, an endangered salamander. They're not going to let you take that, they'll pump it dry, you know. I just saw one of those the other day. It was like endangered. Yeah, absolutely. All right, I'm gonna get back to the presentation a little bit. So do not obstruct, alter, or dam a natural stream without approval from the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. And if you are pumping water, there are requirements, screening requirements, so it's not for the take, which means like the killing or the sucking in of aquatic species that may be threatened or endangered. And then there's water conservation measures. Water is really important. You guys are probably all using water conservation measures, but some examples that are outlined are like applying mulch, using drip irrigation, not overwatering. Soggy cannabis plants don't like soggy roots, so not for an extended period of time at least. Okay, I'm good. These are the issues. So water supply was one of the issues. Now we're at erosion and sediment. So this is some examples. You've got erosion, someone graded into easily erodible soils, and then it rains on it, and down below, it's kind of hard to see, but there is a creek down below that, and all this sand went into the creek, and we've actually went down to where that creek went into a anadromous salmonid spawning area, a salmon stream, and sand from this, it was the big graded picture that Griffin showed you, and sand from that operation had filled in a whole pool, like many feet deep. We didn't get to the bottom, so I can't tell you how many, but at least 6 feet deep. Then on the right, this is talking about roads. This is, if you can see the clear water here, and then turbid water. This is a discharge from a road. Just the roads up the hill is actually like a half mile up the hill from this location. There's a trout stream down below. Turbid water coming off where the road was unraveling, and then it reaches the stream below, makes it turbid, and now trout have a hard time finding food, and it also kind of gums up their beds. All right. In Nevada County, in the Yuba River watershed, it seems that none of the counties are going to allow the large Type 3 cultivation operations. So, the 1 acre canopy, if you're outdoors, 22,000 square feet if you're mixed light. So right now is the time to be thinking about 2018 and getting yourselves into compliance. If you have a site that's small, because you're going to be limited to a small site, and you don't want to be in that high threat category, because the high threat category is very expensive. The permit right now is $10,000. We won't know what it'll cost when the statewide general order comes out, but it will be the highest price and the hardest to comply with. So if you can now, keep it in mind what trying to identify what is coming down the pipe from your board of supervisors. Anticipating that it's going to be small, probably less than 10,000 square feet. It sounds like maybe the 2,500 cottage might be all that's allowed. So you want to get your site where it's going to be the cheapest to comply with and the most and the easiest to comply with. So if your site, it may be small now, but if it's right beside a water course within 100 feet or within 200 feet, it may be a good time to start preparing for the future and getting your operation to a different location where it'll be easier to comply and cheaper. Go ahead. Great question. Right now, water courses for cannabis regulations are defined by the forest practice rules in the California Department of Fish and Wildlife stream classification system. And that there's 3 classifications, class 1, 2, and 3. Class 1 is a water body that either provides domestic water supply or is a fish-bearing water body. So if there's fish, and they don't have to live there all year, it can be seasonal. There's trout streams that dry up, but that's still a class 1 water body. Class 2 is an aquatic wildlife-bearing water body. So it's a water body that can support water-loving plants It's a water body that can support the little bugs that trout like to eat, or other fish as well. And it, or salamanders, or frogs as well, just any kind of aquatic wildlife. And then class 3 water bodies are those that flow pretty much only when it's raining or only during the wet period. They have an identifiable channel. I've seen them as small as that. They don't have to be very big. Actually, they're always typically very small. But it is a water body that requires protection. Yeah, that's the reason why we give those water bodies protection. They may not support aquatic wildlife, but they discharge, their water goes to a water body that provides aquatic wildlife. So that's why we're protecting them. So that is the definitions, the thing that you need to comply with. But so if you're trying to think of them conceptually, a class 1 water course is a perennial water body, most likely, meaning that there's water there year round, particularly in the Sierras. It's analogous what I'm about to say. So then a class 2 is one of those, is an intermittent water body, meaning that it flows either a majority of the year or all year round, just not enough to support a fish species. And then a class 3 is a ephemeral water body, meaning it basically only flows when rain's falling out of the sky on it. All right.
How much water storage do you recommend for like a year one?
Well, it's going to really depend on what kind of plants you're growing. If you're growing big trees, you're going to need a lot of water per plant. But then there's other smaller plants that can require a tenth as much. So it's really hard. That's a really hard question for me to answer. What I've been seeing. So are you talking about storage for a whole year? I'd have to run a calculation on that. I can tell you what I normally see with the tier 1s is they'll have at least one 2,500 gallon storage tank at or in connection to their well. So they'll keep that full, but they have a well. If you had rainwater catchment, let me think. Maybe 10. Yeah. I've seen a 10,000 gallon bladder, but I don't even know like how much of the year they were using that, because they also had a spring that they had diverted water from. So I could maybe run a calculation, but I would have to like get out my calculator, run it, and give you an estimate.
So 2,500 would be pretty good for a year one.
Well, it depends on how many plants. Yeah. One thing I should have specified: our general order is for disturbed area, so not canopy site. So we're talking about our site is the water board, road, pad, storage areas, canopy. So it really depends on how much sun exposure you're getting, where you're located, elevation band-wise, your heat, and how many plants you have, what kind of soil. It's a tough question to answer.
Yeah.
Really
CDFW has estimated. They put out a report that estimated up to 6 gallons per plant per day at the maximum amount. That's when the plant is just before harvest, though. That's 6 gallons per day per plant. They obviously aren't using that much water, and like we said, you don't want to overwater these plants. That's a no-no. And so there's for most of the life cycle, they're not using that much water. But at the end, when California is its driest, is when the most water is being used. I don't know if I've answered your question, but I've tried.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Just to interject real quick, later in the workshop series, there will be a water catchment. So I think we'll come closer towards fall and we'll be specifically answering this question. Thank you.
Yeah, and like I said, with the coming rules and regulations, it behooves you to go ahead and get a water meter on your irrigation system, just to know how much water you're using, and what portion during the year, how much you're using per month. That's going to be requirements going into 2018. And it's also just it's gonna help you plan how much water you need to store to make it through that period.
Just on John Whaler speaking this afternoon.
Oh, great.
Can that water storage area supply a residential home and your agricultural area?
Okay, so right now, yes, the answer to that is going to be yes, because we're not going to make you drill another well, but there are some things that are happening right now before the principles and guidelines are fully implemented. So like you couldn't, Griffin, you might want to correct me on this. The small domestic user permit.
So it depends on what kind of water rate you're filing under. So if you're filing under like small ag, you wouldn't be able to use. And this would be for like surface erosion. If you're filing under a small ag, you wouldn't be able to use that water for domestic. Or if you're filing for small domestic, there might be issues with you using that water for ag because the water rights are different. But if you're talking about just a storage tank with a catchment system, there's nothing that says you can't use it for those. You just need to be prepared that if you are going to be using it for cannabis, it's going to be part of the site, and you're going to be able to separate your usage from your domestic use and your ag use and be able to track.
And if you are diverting water from a surface water body, right now, it's one of those things that you can do before the Board of Supervisors adopts any kind of ordinance in Nevada County, is you can go ahead and file a riparian water right, and then there's reporting requirements associated with that, and you're going to have to do it next year, and you can go ahead and do it now and be one step ahead of the curve. I strongly encourage you. Is anybody in here diverting from surface water, if I might ask? I figured, is everyone here on well, or basically? I mean, that's pretty common. That's what we see in the Sierras. It's like everybody's got a well. That's how their water supply. And so you basically have water storage. The groundwater is your storage of water. So you,
What's the minimum gallon per minute on a well?
I don't think anyone would be happy with less than half a gallon per minute on a well. I'm not aware of any requirements that a certain amount of production, but I think if you had a well driller and you wouldn't be happy with your driller if at the end of the day you're only getting a half gallon per minute. I have seen some 1 and 2 gallon per minute wells, but they're fine with that. They just slap a solar powered well to it, and then they put 3 of those 2,500 gallon storage tanks, and so they never run out of water because all day long, all year long, it's filling those tanks. But important, you need to have automatic shutoff. I've seen a lot of cultivators who don't have an automatic shutoff, so this solar powered pump, it fills up 7,500 gallons, and then it just keeps pumping, and then it spills on the ground and it may reach a water body below with some turbid water as it erodes. So that's one of the requirements. It's one of the best management practices. You're going to have an automatic float valve or something so it shuts off and doesn't keep either diverting water or pumping water, whatever the case may be, after your storage tanks are full. So you've decided that you need to move to a new site. If you're going to do any grading, make sure you use a licensed, reputable contractor. Some of these guys that have gotten in trouble with the water board, they just used a licensed timber operator who had lost their license, or unlicensed timber operator that still had equipment. They went out and bulldozed the hillside, and now it's unraveling because they didn't compact it well and they didn't implement erosion sediment control. So use a legit contractor if you're having to do any development. Avoid riparian zones. So there's going to be right now you have to stay in Nevada County or with the Central Valley General Order. You have to stay over 100 feet from any surface water body. It's going to be at least 50 feet in the future, if not 100, most likely 100. And if you're more than 100 or more than 200, you're going to stay in those lower threat categories. So now the effort to comply is much less and less costly, and then your permit fees are much less costly as well. And avoid steep slopes if you can, because as soon as you're cultivating on steep slopes, there's a lot. Steep slopes are defined as greater than 30%. That's about the difference between a green and blue on Ski Hill. I figured you guys in Water County, you know about that. So like that 30% is kind of the cutoff between a green and a blue run. Yeah, all right. That's too much for you guys. All right, we're gonna. So talking about road construction again. Roads are the issue, and in most cases. So we want, ideally, you'll have either a crowned road if you're on top of a hill where water flows. You want to get the water off your road as quickly as possible is the idea. And so if you can crown it where water will flow in both directions as fast as possible, or outslope your road, you're getting the water off. It's not running down the unvegetated road surface, and that's when it picks up energy, picks up sediment, and when it finally leaves the road surface, you've got that turbid water, like I showed in the picture earlier, that is pollution essentially. If you can't, a lot of these roads are historic roads, and the way they used to do was they insloped everything. So they're old timber or mining roads that have just kept being maintained and used, and now the only option you have is an inslope road. So what we're talking about, I don't know if you guys can see, but so outslope, water's going away. Inslope, now you have a ditch on the inside, and you're going to need to protect that ditch from erosion, and you're also going to still want to get the water out of that ditch out of the road complex as soon as possible, and you're going to have to put in a culvert, and then you're going to have to dissipate the energy of the water at the outfall of the culvert. So once again, probably the best thing we have, the Water Board has on their education outreach webpage of the cannabis website. They have, it's called the Rural Ranch Roads Handbook or whatever. They go in a lot of detail. It's like 100 and something, 120 pages, and they go into all the detail. If you're going to be building a road or if you have road issues, I highly recommend you take a look at that, because like I said, roads are the biggest issue when it comes to pollution that we've seen. So take it seriously. If you're going to be using your road in the winter period, and the winter wet weather period is defined as November 1st to April 30th, 15th. Yeah, April 15th. Yeah, and so and most of you guys are probably going to be using it. We were just talking about, November, middle of November, you're still harvesting. So if you're going to be using your road, you're going to have to weatherproof it somehow, because we're talking about 2018 and beyond. Your cultivation operation is a commercial operation now, subject to rules and regulations that any other commercial business in the state of California be subject to. So the example is farm roads and timber roads. If they're going to use them in the winter, they have to gravel them. So keep that in mind. That's also, if you're already going to move your site, you may want to move it to where the link between a paved surface and your cultivation operation is short as possible, because it can cost $10 to $100 per linear foot to gravel a road. All right.
That's just a regular grade chip, huh?
It can be. It's normally what's locally available. So up here, you probably have crushed granite road base. I would think. Does anybody know?
Grade chip is what we use on our road.
Is that crushed granite what you're calling grade chip?
Yeah, from Hanson Brothers, we get a deal on it.
Okay.
We create our whole road.
Yeah.
It's a private road where we are at.
Well, so now we're going to talk about watercourse crossings. So once again, the source of pollution is the road, but where the pollutant water discharges to a surface water body is often at watercourse crossings. And so what we want to do, this is just more road construction. It's all about rolling dips and water bars. These are ways to get the water off your road. So now you're either going up or down an incline. So you can't just outslope your road. Now, the outslope really only works you want to keep it outsloped as well when you're going up and down. But that only works as a standalone when the road's flat. As soon as it's going up or down, which I'm sure most of the roads around here are they're on a slope. So now you have to basically stop the water from running down your road and get it off again. So these are once again, these are the requirements that you're going to have to abide by, because you now have a commercial business on your properties if you go forward. And there are two different ways to do it. They call it a grade reversal or a rolling dip. That's where you dig out, so it actually, the road surface is headed down. You dig it out, it gets steeper, and then it comes back up. And you guys see this on the Forest Service a lot. You guys drive Forest Service roads, and so it's called a rolling dip. It makes it easier. You don't have to like stop and ease over the erosion or the drainage feature. Whereas water bars, that's the top left. That's just right in the middle. They piled up dirt a foot tall. They mounded it somewhat so you can go over it, but now you're having to come to a nearly complete stop before rolling over. It's not so easy, even in a 4x4. Yeah, so when it comes to roads, so there's a lot of that's being implemented. A lot of the things, the permaculture and the bioswales, and then I can't, like they're straw, instead of straw wattles, they put compost in them, and those work really, really well. So yeah, and so those things are most commonly associated. I actually have seen nothing like that associated with the roads. They're more, I've seen them associated with the cultivation area. And so when you have your cultivation area, and so they'll implement those kind of practices there. Absolutely. I mean, whatever is effective at eliminating or mitigating pollution from your site. But for the roads, it's kind of a been there, done that. This is like 100 years of technological development and how to manage these roads. And so there's some construction stormwater practices that are just bulletproof, and it's like hydro seeding. Yeah, okay, maybe not bulletproof. Yeah. Well, you know what the deal is those things haven't been upgraded. What happens is they blow out, you have problems, and then they finally upgrade them to where they should have been. So like I've been driving over to Lake County a lot, and they had some massive like mudslides come down there. The Highway 20 going to Clear Lake should have been upgraded 3 decades ago, but it wasn't an emergency. Now it's emergency. Everything is getting brought up to code basically. They're rocking every inch of that. Those ditches and the road surface is getting. It's just 49 is probably going to do the same thing. One day there'll be an emergency, and they'll finally spend the money to upgrade the roads. I mean, like I said, it's kind of been a development that we've learned. Yeah. Yeah. And that's what I was talking about. When you're thinking about your cultivation operation, look at it, see what your issues are right now. You may want to continue cultivating on it this year in compliance with the rules and regs allowed in Nevada County, but be developing your site that the site you're going to get permitted, the site that's easiest to comply, the site that's going to have the least issues and problems. Be thinking about that. Take a look at the property that you own. See. I know it's hard. You guys have picked site location based on privacy, and that often leads to some of the worst sites because that puts you on steeper slopes. Some of the best sites are easily viewable, and so that's the problem. We'll go to the next. Okay, all right, yeah. So watercourse crossings, that is the other big thing. One thing, it's clear in the draft regs that came out from CDFA, you're going to have a 1600 permit. They're really pushing that hard. That's the Lake and Stream Alteration Agreement with the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. So if you have any watercourse crossings on your site right now, you want to go ahead and start. It's one of those things you can do now in advance of commercial cultivation ordinance being adopted in Nevada County. You can go ahead, get your CDFW 1600 permit. This is an example of a really ideal wet ford crossing. You have the water from the ditches is discharged before reaching the watercourse crossing, the ford, and so into slash. So that's energy dissipation, and the turbid water from the road surface is not going directly into the natural stream. It's going to the hillside where hopefully there'll be vegetation that can dissipate the water energy so it doesn't erode anything else, and all that sediment can be retained on site. I'll go maybe one more slide. This is an example of a culverted crossing. Once again, another 1600. Something that's really important that I rarely see are, once again, you get the water off the road before the crossing, but this critical dip here, every culvert is going to plug and fail at some point. And so the idea is that when that culvert plugs, providing an armored structure for water to flow over the watercourse crossing, and so you're not just discharging, however amount of fill material is there, 10 cubic yards of fill material to the watercourse below. Once again, I'm gonna cut it off, provide for a panel discussion. All this information is available at the Water Board website, Central Valley Water Board, cannabis, 5 words. And this information, well, actually, the stuff I've been showing you here is in the Best Management Practices Manual for Cannabis Cultivators. If you're enrolling for coverage under the general order, it's a requirement that you have this Best Management Practices Manual on site at all times, and that you implement all applicable best management practices. So it may be a really good idea, go and download this, print it out, put it at your site. You may not be in a position to submit for coverage under the Water Board's general order at this time, but at the very least, you can fully comply with the tenets of the general order. Does that make sense? Yeah. So this is attachment A to the general order. So there's the website's composed of 5 web pages: the home page, and then the general order information page. That's where you'll get the general order. That's the permit. You'll get attachment A, the Best Management Practices Manual. You'll get attachment B, the Notice of Intent. When that's your application, for lack of a better word, to get coverage under the Water Board's general order. And then so the third web page, Education and Outreach web page, is where you'll find. I don't even know how many documents are on there. I put like every bit of information I could find out there for free. We wanted to make it free to cultivators. We wanted to get it in their hands. If you're like me, you can geek out on this stuff for hours, days even. So I'm going to cut it off now for time. I think what's going on.
Thanks. Thank you so much. So we have a couple more minutes here for questions for Trey, for Griffin, and for Kevin. Looks like we have one. You guys have a mic over there.
My question is, our old mining trenches that delivered water to mines back in the day, they were dry most of the time, don't go into a confluence?
Yeah, it really depends on where they deliver to. So technically speaking, if you had a ditch that delivers to a Class 2 watercourse, that ditch could be considered a Class 3 because it delivers to the watercourse. Now, if you're talking about something that's just going from the mine site into like a settlement pond that doesn't discharge anything else from there, then no, it's just a surface water drainage course. It's not really jurisdictional. So, kind of site specific, but in general, if something has a bed banker channel and it flows to something else that has a bed banker channel, then it'd be a jurisdictional water course. Okay. Yeah, so all of the sizes listed in the general order are for the site as a whole. So if you have a 1/4 acre of canopy and you are on a slope, the graded area, or if you were constructing a terrace, would be considered from the fill slope of that terrace all the way up to the cut slope. So you could have a 2-acre disturbance for 1 acre of cannabis canopy. So it's kind of similar thinking along those lines. So the site from the water board, because again we're looking at it from potential impacts to water quality, we're looking at all the ground disturbance. So any ground disturbance related to the site is considered the area for the permit. That could include soil stockpiles, storage sheds if you're storing fertilizers or anything specific to that cultivation. The cultivation area itself, it could include access roads. If the access road was constructed solely for access to that cannabis site. So it's just, again, just think of it in terms of anything at the site that has been disturbed for the production or for the cultivation of cannabis. The house doesn't. No, it's specifically related to the cannabis cultivation site. But okay, so I didn't specify earlier. Also, if you're under 1,000 square feet, you're exempt from the general order. So then from there it goes between 1,000 square feet and a 1/4 acre. You're in the tier 1 category. In addition, you have to be further than 200 feet from an aquatic life-bearing watercourse and on slopes less than 30%. The tier 2 site, you're going from that 1/4 acre up to an acre, and then you're still on slopes less than 30%, and you're still greater than 200 feet from an aquatic life-bearing watercourse. The tier 3 sites, if you're over an acre, or if you're on slopes over 30%, or if you're closer than 200 feet to an aquatic life-bearing watercourse, that's the tier 3.
How do these regulations compare with other agricultural industries?
So yeah, specific to our general order, the requirements of the regulation are very similar to what's required in a few different programs. One of them being the timber activities program that the Central Valley Board has, the construction stormwater program, and it's similar in aspects to the irrigated lands regulatory program. Specific to the timber program, there are no fees associated with that because there's a lumber tax that pays for the regulation itself. The other programs are fee-based, so the fees that get paid pay for staff costs, pay for implementation. So the costs are all set by the state board. So they take into consideration what type of regulation it is, what type of industry, and it's similarly cost to similar types of regulation. So the fees associated with it are in line. The tiering structure is a little bit different, like the irrigated ag program is kind of acreage based. This program, it's really unique because there's a mix of all of it. There's a mix of the timber program for any conversion. There's a mix of construction program because if it's on slopes, most of the time we're finding terraces or leveled areas. It's a mix of the irrigated ag because that's basically what's occurring is irrigated ag. Just the preparation and the land use is a little different. So the tiering based on risk is a little bit more unique, but that was the best way that Trey and the rest of the program could find to address the environmental concerns. Was that a long-winded answer, but. Yeah, so in commercial sized operations on that front would be handled by the irrigated lands regulatory program, and it's very similar. Monitoring requirements, best management practices, annual fees, they're all pretty similar. Yeah, and I can't speak too much to that, but I know that the regulations they have in place allow the use of whatever they're using as long as they're using it in accordance with label requirements. And I mean, in the irrigated ag program, there is sampling requirements to make sure that there aren't impacts to nearby water bodies. So, you know, the environmental regulations, for some of, you know, they do attempt to address any discharges, and that's why they have monitoring requirements, and they have certain things you have to do to make sure that discharges and pollution don't occur.
You're absolutely right. I mean, there is a higher standard. That's what I was saying. The state of California intends to, from what I can tell, the state of California intends to make cannabis industry the cleanest, the most environmentally friendly industry, and it's going to be the most heavily regulated industry from what I can tell at this, what I've seen. And traditional agriculture gets away with a lot of things because it was exempted from the Clean Water Act. They've lobbied for the exemptions that they have. I can tell you California is a lot cleaner in their agricultural practices than other states. And the Irrigated Lands program that Griffin was referencing, they've done a lot recently to clean up a lot of the issues. It has been, for example, they used to spray pesticides on a windy day when the wind was blowing directly towards a receiving water body. They didn't care. You know, it was like we got to blow these pesticides today, so we're gonna spray them. Now they're getting that under control. So basically, if wind is blowing from one direction to the other, and the drift of that pesticide would then in the creek is like, no, you can't do that today. They are getting cleaner, but the fact of the matter is traditional agriculture. It was exempted from many of the tenets of the Clean Water Act. It was exempted from most of the Port of Cologne Water Quality Act of the state of California. Maybe. If you keep fighting, maybe. I mean, I don't know what to tell you. I mean, it's a huge. You guys are gonna remember it's a huge industry in the state of California with a large lobbying effort. These rules and regs come from laws that are adopted in Sacramento. So unless the laws change, I can't see the regs getting too much because every time the water board tries to clamp down on them, they get pushback from the industry, and the industry has lots of attorneys ready to go to bat for them.
Well, just one more clarification. So they are exempt, you know, traditional ag is exempt from Clean Water Act. However, the California Water Code, and specifically the Central Valley Basin Plan, so each regional board has a basin plan. It doesn't matter what industry you're coming from or what you're doing, all Californians are required to meet basin plan objectives. Now again, like Trey said, some industries it takes a little bit more effort and you have a few more hurdles to go through to meet that requirement, but it is something that is required in the Central Valley Basin that you meet these plans, and then also in the California Water Code. I can say that for all the other industries that we regulate, we use the tools that we have available to regulate to the best we can, and then. But there are obviously different issues related with different programs.
Hey, well, thank you, everyone. I think I'm going to cut us off right there so we have enough time for lunch. If you have more questions, I think you guys are sticking around for a little bit. So reach out to these guys, ask them questions. We're going to reconvene here at 1:15 for our legal panel. We have Heather Burke, Stephen Munkelt, and Jennifer Granger who will be joining us to talk about legal issues. After that, we will be looking at water catchment and water delivery systems and how to take care of your soil and get proper nutrients to your plants.